My name is Michael Galvin. I'm the director of the Office of Technology Integration for University Life. I'm also on the a grateful member of the Center for Consciousness and Transformation Brown Bag Committee. And I'm honored to take my turn as facilitator today. So allow me to welcome our friends, affiliates, and fans of the Center for Consciousness and Transformation, and to people from around the globe and perhaps extraterrestrial that may be viewing courtesy of the University Life live streaming channel there. The committee is encouraged and honored over time that people from on and off campus find value in these conversations and continue to spend their traditional lunch hour with us once a month. The format of the conversation has stabilized for the time being. Our presenter speaks for 20 minutes or so to the topic that he or she brings to the table in relationship to the overarching theme that defines a series of conversations, 2, 3, or 4. Today, as it was for the last brown bag, the theme is transformation. When the presenter has finished, we will ask the respondents to take from 5 to 10 minutes to contribute their own perspective to what has been said, perhaps providing some feedback, questions, or additional information to stimulate an open conversation amongst us all for the remaining 20 minutes or more. Bathrooms are, well, the men's bathroom is right there. Women's bathroom is on the other side of that structure. Please avail yourself of the snacks. There's coffee, lemonade, lots of neat stuff courtesy of the Center for Consciousness and Transformation. Please do eat something, or they're going to end up figuring out that we don't want it. It'll go away. We need to consume some food. Our presenter today is John O'Connor. John is the director of the higher education program here at George Mason University and professor in New Century College. John teaches in learning communities on community and citizenship, and this past fall was the course leader for NCLC 102. That's a New Century Learning Community class, Global Communities and Networks. He also teaches the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning and the History of Higher Education for the university's higher ed program. Yay! John was the founding dean of New Century College. Previously, he was vice provost for information technology and co-director of the Instructional Development Office. From 2000 to 2004, he was a senior scholar at American Associates for Higher Education, where he directed projects on the Engaged campus. These projects support the public engagements of colleges and universities in their communities and the preparation of students for their civic responsibilities. In 2003, he was honored with the GNU David King Teaching Award, and in 2004, received an Outstanding Faculty Award from the State Council of Higher Education, Virginia. You've been asked, I believe, to prepare for this meeting by thinking about specific moments when education changed you. John's topic is transformative education and learning. So those educational moments that you've already thought of, maybe formal, they may be informal, in the classroom or not. And then you were asked to think about how institutions aided and abetted those changes or not. And your recommended reading was the Mason Mission Statement. Funny how that reminds me of my recommended reading for one of my classes in my first semester of the Higher Ed Master's Program. In the fall of 2005, I believe it was a class entitled The History of Higher Education. I think you were there. Our respondents today are Mark Thurston and Rose Pasquarella. Mark is the Senior Fellow at the Center for Consciousness and Transformation. He's worked for his entire professional career in the area of education related to topics of consciousness, primarily with midlife adults. He's been especially committed to bringing contemplative practices into educational settings. Rose is Associate Vice President of the Division of University Life. In her 15 years at Mason, Rose has worked with incredible students who came through the Women's Center and Women's Studies program, and for the last several years with the fabulous staff and students of the Division of University Life. Rose is trained as a sociologist. Her teaching has revolved around race, class, gender, sexual orientation, identities, and the study of difference. Rose sees higher education, the classroom, and the campus environment as all offering endless possibilities for transformation. John, it's a privilege to introduce you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for so many friends being here. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm pretty informal, so I'll be talking informally, and as you have objections or observations or questions, I don't think I'll go 20 minutes, but please speak up as we go, and this will be conversation. And as Michael said, your homework was one to read the mission statement, which we'll look at in a moment for particular reasons, but the other is, one was a transformative moment, if there was one. I don't want to look at all those out, but we'll look at a few of those out as a kind of couple. I want to maybe make 4 talking points to get us started. Education, I think, has always been seen as transformative. So is education transformative? I think most people would say yes, if you ask Socrates, or at least the leaders of the community, they would have said yes. But education in America has been seen from the start as, well, almost from the start as transformative. The start was to train ministers. But shortly after that, it was to form young men, to make them masculine and muscular in their thought. And there's a great quote that captures part of the need for education in the college of the 18th century. Was to get boys, and of course it was young men, not women, young men away from their mothers, who were coddling them, and that they had to bring them together and make the generation of American leaders. And so that this idea of transforming is fundamental to education, but that in that term transformation, as I'll say in more detail in a moment, is I think also an idea of education as training, education as conforming as well as transforming. Always follow a quote with a cartoon, and Calvin is my key. Today for show and tell I brought a tiny marvel of nature, a single snowflake, appropriate for this winter. I think we might all learn a lesson from this utterly unique and exquisite crystal. It turns into an ordinary, boring molecule of water, just like every other one we create in a classroom. And now, while the analogy sinks in, I'll be leaving you drips and go outside, Calvin. And this gets at a number of things for me. One is the relationship between experience, personal experience, informal learning, and the classroom. And that the classroom can be a powerful place, but the classroom also can be a place that reduces experience, reduces nature, reduces culture, reduces the person. And that's one of my concerns, is education as discipline. And Calvin needs discipline. But that this tension I see between informal learning and a classroom practice. And let me see what else I want to say about this. That's it. So the kind of key terms I want us to think about is this tension. This is not an easy duality. If there's anything I've learned from a little bit of feminist philosophy, I found is not to do this either or that I'm doing right here, but to see these as kind of points on a spectrum of conform and transform. And then I think a lot of education is about keeping us in rows, rows in the classroom. And there's lots of reasons of efficiency for that, and that's not to be denied in mass education. But connected to that, for me, is an education of technical rationality, of creating learners, students who critical thinking, and critical thinking of a certain sort within an objective, verifiable, knowable, true reality. And that particularly in engineering and sciences, but across the board. That the focus is on curriculum. If you get faculty together, the conversation pretty quickly goes to curriculum, to subject matter. That's what we are, as knowledge area experts. And so it's this subject matter. And the belief that in education, it's the knowledge that counts. What are the courses we need for a general education? What are the courses we need for a major? What should a student know? And those are important, powerful questions, I think, that they drive this model. And that traditionally education has been the 18 to 24-year-old, the boys, young men in the previous quote. And that's still huge, right? There are still many, many, many 18 to 24-year-olds, boys and girls, that are being educated. And that education is seen as a moment of liminality, a moment of in-between. That college is the place where you can try things out, that you can experiment, that you can create a new self, and that you learn in dorms, in classrooms, in curricular, extracurricular, co-curricular experiences, who you are and who you want to be. But that education is still primarily built for the old traditional student rather than the new traditional student. And that education is personal. It's individual grades, individual tests, individual accomplishments, and that it's about development of the person. I want to suggest an alternative set of terms around transformation, and that's an education in values. And for someone my age in education, that's really uneasy. Education is technical rationality. Keep it free of values. Keep it free from those kinds of subjective judgments. That this is pure knowledge, it's objective knowledge. Values not a place in the classroom. There's not a place in the classroom for values. And that many people on this campus would make that argument. Some others would argue that values education is very important, and that this liminal moment is a time of testing values. When I wasn't going to do this, but I will. When I was a young Catholic educated boy, and the nuns wanted me to go to seminary, and I decided I was going to go up the street. I grew up in Ann Arbor. I was going to go to the University of Michigan. I said, "Oh, you'll lose your religion. That's a place with no values." They were half right. That opposed to curricular knowledge, I think it's learning experience, and the deliberate pun there of learning experience, learning how to think about experience, a reflective practice, and how to make sense of our experience, but also learning how to comprehend our experiences, how to make sense of them. And that, as I think we probably all know, particularly in this place and this time, that learning is perpetual. Lifelong learners, the adult education, continuing education, I think changes the nature of what we want to do in education. So it's not a body of knowledge. And the Barm-Tagg article in '95 that had such influence of moving from to a pedagogy influence and a learner perspective, I think is very important. And then finally, I think that learning ought to be communal, that we recognize much of knowledge making is social construction of knowledge, but that also we ought to be thinking very explicitly about how we work together. And that's my bias about higher education as a civic endeavor, but nevertheless that to work more on community values. This is the point where I'd be curious to hear from some of you. I can't do everybody, but a few of you who took my question seriously about, what was a transformative moment. I'm curious, was it a classroom experience? Was it a piece of knowledge? E equals MC squared. Transformative moment. 1066. Transformative moment. Or was it out of classroom? Was it summer camp? A couple people willing to share.
In 1992, I was at an exhibit in California, an exhibition, and I met a Japanese developer engineer who introduced me to a brainwave interface to the computer, and this changed my whole life, this introduction. I bought the system, and because I could foresee the use for this system for neurological learning, which expands perceptual awareness and influences consciousness. So I'm still working with this today, developing prototypes for brainwave games for learning.
would say it was a book I read in my doctoral program. Shirley Bryce Heath's Ways with Words. And it was transformative in shaking up my upbringing in a small rural town to a point that I really discovered more about who I was, the good and the bad, and the in-between. So it was really a book. And the context was a course that I've always characterized as the place I learned the most. For whatever it means, it's the one doctoral course I made a B in. And that was a powerful moment.
The moment that I'm thinking of actually occurred on an alternative break trip with some students. I had worked with some students, took them down to near Key Largo. We were doing some conservation work. And 3 of the students came to me one evening really a little bit upset about the way they were treated when they went shopping in a local market, that their bags were checked and on their way out. And I kind of like minimized it as like, you know, harassing the tourist, the young people here for spring break. And they were not very pleased, and they pulled me aside the next day and had me notice that none of them were white. And their experience of it and understanding of it was completely different from what mine was. And that, you know, although I had lots of diversity awareness training and read a lot about it, that moment of really having them pull me aside and understand it differently from their experience was really powerful.
Mine was with a faculty member that I had, but not within the classroom. So I was in community college. I came from a neighborhood where nobody went to college. But I decided to take a crack at it. Took a full semester of courses, and was in a course where I was asked to do a self-analysis, a 15-page self-analysis, which for a working class kid in a college environment, you know, that was not gonna happen well for me. So I thought about it, and I decided I was dropping out of college. And I went and talked to the faculty member and said, you know, I'm not going to do this exercise. I'm not just going to drop out without telling you, because I have some pride, you know, so I'm gone. And she said to me, well, then don't do a self-analysis, do a paper on dissent. And in that moment, it was, you know, it made all the difference in shifting for me in terms of how I saw myself in that environment, the choices I had, and just kind of what I had to do.
I couldn't have scripted this better. The points I want to make. I mean, all 4, these are exactly, I mean, right this morning before coming up here, I was reading Doctor of Arts applications for the higher education program. The first line of this one application is, I've gone from a GED to a DA application, and it's because of one teacher. And then it goes on to talk about this teacher not in the classroom, but as a mentor outside the classroom, and believing in possibilities. And I think that the power of us as educators, it's in the classroom, but it's also outside the classroom. And the various kinds of studies of student experience about just 10 minutes in a year of an educator's time with a student is one of the key factors in students staying in college. And so that kind of, it's roads that has to transform. We can't make the transformation, but those relationships. Heather's point about experience is that Calvin's experience is the experience, and I'll show another cartoon in a moment, of course, that I want to try and reinforce that one. The other two is I want to suggest that books and art, for many people, are transformative moments. The line here a couple of times of seeing or understanding differently. And that's not true for everybody, but for many people, books are to see differently. And the funny, I think tools whether I'm using a hammer or whether I'm using a screwdriver, shapes my learning. So that we have now a whole, Michael can talk about this even more than I, the tools that we have for transforming education and shaping the key of these two terms of form, the structure of learning, of formation of learning by the tools we use to learn, whether it's the linear book or whether it's various kinds of social networks. Okay, Mason mission. And my question here is to what extent institutions have a role in personal and communal transformation. That we have sold higher education in my lifetime as personal gain rather than as public good. That you're going to make more money as a college graduate than if you're not. And that has come back to bite us in that most legislatures now see higher education as a personal gain. You pay tuition, pay more tuition, that's an investment, you're going to get it back. And we don't see this as public education. But here are some key, I think this is a terrific mission. I'm proud of Mason's mission, I'm proud of the one before this, and I'm quite happy with this newly revised one. But what I've put in red are some phrases that I want to ask us, where does this happen? So that the shaping of a global community with vision, justice, and clarity. Right? I mean, but where does this happen? I think some of this happens, but where is it institutionally created? Enable students to exercise analytic and imaginative thinking and make well-founded ethical decisions. I don't know that I can be happier. But again, where in the curriculum does this happen? How do we structure, how do we form, use this transform, how do we form experience, curriculum, activities, events for this to happen? And responsive to the needs of students and their communities. And I think this is a college, university that is relatively engaged with its community in multiple ways. But in what ways we are institutionally committed to our communities, however those get defined, and how we identify needs, responsive to the needs. Who identifies the needs of students and their communities? And I'm not trying to be a smart aleck in asking these kinds of questions. These are important kinds of questions that here's an aspirational reality, and where that happens institutionally. And by putting this in red, we've made these institutional missions rather than individual missions. These may be my missions as an individual teacher, but say these are Mason missions. How does it get
John, just to comment on this, I'm in web communications and university relations, and we are rolling out a new tagline, which some of you might know, where innovation is tradition. And the big question is the exact questions you asked there, who on campus we can get stories, images, make videos of. So it's a big question. It's very difficult.
Well, you press one of my buttons. I think one of the challenges always about innovation is not to come to the norm, not to conform, and we can create experiments, we can create innovation with pressures to be like everyone else, to be another R1 place rather than carve our own. So I'm going to end the course with a cartoon. Good heavens, Pablo got an F in art. Well, I'm just going to go down to that school myself and meet this teacher face to face. I don't know if you can see it well enough, but partly I want to get at Heather's point about seeing differently. I know this, and then to see it differently. And then again, I don't want to get too heavy-handed, but the analog in education of, so that Picasso, I didn't know if we would get books and art out, and I stretched point about books to art, but Picasso as a transformative figure in our perceptions of reality and of art is one thing there. The second thing is that school is going to teach us to see a certain way. And so that, again, the Kelvin tension between learning to see, important book by John Berger, learning to see, teaching what to look for and what the perceived reality is out there. And I think that with the social construction of reality, it gives agency to all of us, gives agency to students, so that Aldo here is able to make something of how he sees things.
Okay, I'm then back to you said you didn't really want a dichotomy, and so I'm sort of struggling with that a little bit, and I came up with a thought. All the things that you mentioned for conform transform when they're applied. So it seems to me if we're looking for where are we helping students achieve those mission goals, it may be in when we take what they're these conforming kinds of things and have it applied to something where they have to struggle with, well, okay, so we have this idea, how does it fit this, or does it? Or is it the right idea to apply to this experience? I think that's where we start to see students moving towards a transformation. And it would, I think it would apply to all groups and ages of students, because they have to take these things that they need first as some kind of tools, or and then it's the application that they begin to see a change.
I think that point on application is very important. I don't mean in this to suggest knowledge, facts, information isn't important.
No, I know that. But I was just trying to get something in the middle there. I came up with applications.
Somebody else have it? Okay, I'm finished with it. Oh.
Well, I think what you said is very important, and I think that the best explanation of the context of our, let's say, discussion or seminar is the theory of successful intelligence. I'm fascinated by this theory because it provides a very elegant framework, conceptual, intellectual framework for understanding us humans as intelligent beings and successful beings with practical, analytical, and creative intelligence. And this theory also claims that you can learn creative intelligence, or you can teach creative intelligence, which entirely changes our understanding of, for example, engineering creativity. And based on my own experience, this semester, for example, I teach a course on inventive engineering. We can talk, of course, about creativity, about methods, but we have to create what is known as so-called intersection. We have to bring many different pieces together, shape them, and then this new quality will emerge as an emerging phenomenon, emerging quality. And of course, this can be done, of course, learning from our friends from Renaissance, using so-called the Medici effect, which is a perfect application of this concept. And I've been trying to do this, and I'm dealing with engineering students, civil engineering students, who are narrowly focused nearly exclusively on analytical or deductive aspects of science, technology, and life. And to move them from deduction to abduction to generation of new ideas means, of course, a fundamental transformation. But no single lecture or theory or method or tool will do this. This must be a complex process, very complex, which has to occur on several levels, on intellectual level, on emotional level, on social level, and only when this unique sweet point, synesthesia, is obtained, this change will occur. In fact, I have just published a book on transformation of engineering education following these lines, so I could talk for a long time about it, and I spent some time studying it. But this approach is simply working. And when we talk about GMU and our analytical and imaginative thinking, basically we are talking about different forms of intelligence. And up to a certain degree, we as a university are trying to do it through international contacts with foreign students, building differentiated communities, etc., etc. But how it translates into transformation, it is a very interesting issue. And I'd like to raise another issue. We are talking about education and teaching our students as it is a static process. I think that it isn't, because our society is undergoing changes, evolution, or transformation. We have more and more publications and talk about moving from industrial to post-industrial society, or scientific to post-scientific society, including our own Chris Hill. And in all these cases means that education has to change, because this post-industrial society, at least in engineering context, means not only practical and analytical intelligence, but also creative intelligence, moving from hard facts to emotions, moving to concepts, to creativity. And this is simply a reflection of a process which is part of evolution of our civilization. And how and where to put education in this context is a fascinating question.
Terrific. I mean, it's all music to my ears.
Do we have
I mean, I think that just one point. John C. Brown talks about having to be architects or engineers of learning. I think constructing, emerging, to use your term, learning experiences, I think, is the kind of challenge. But I'm done.
Good. I'd like us to hear from our respondents and questioners. Would either one of you want to go first?
Okay.
Okay, Rose.
I'm not sure I'm going to make sense, because you raised so many issues for me. Will you go back to your first slide again? That one. So one of the things that's interesting to me about this, particularly when I think about what role do institutions play, is that gets embedded in, we need to create environments for training. It's also embedded in oppression and sexism. So, I mean, I think one of the interesting things about institutions, and this one, is that we always have to be aware of that. What gets perpetuated and what continues in an educational institution. And that educational institutions can be both transformative, but also incredibly oppressive. And something about being conscious and aware that both those things are happening seems to me transformative in itself. I think, even though I didn't start out in this place, John, but when I hear you talk about it, I kind of want to make this argument that I always make around, kind of the importance of seeing, particularly higher ed in a student's educational experience holistically, and that happens through the integration of what's happening in the classroom and what's happening outside of the classroom. And that, transformation really is a kind of a full-body experience. Yeah. And in student affairs, the way we talk about transformative learning is kind of where the intersection of disciplinary learning and identity development begins to happen, and where folks begin to make meaning of their everyday lives in the context of what they're learning in the classroom. And so one without the other typically creates a slightly fragmented, version of ourselves. And I think also, I wrote this term down, so I was looking at Bell Hooks' picture up there. Bell Hooks talks about the college environment and faculty members as really needing to create environments of radical openness. And so when I hear you talk about, creative thinking and the kinds of conversations, the points that you raised, John, I think about, are we able to do that here? Can we create environments of radical openness for our students to learn both in the classroom, out of the classroom, make connections, make meanings of their lives?
I like that word environment, because I think it's really important that we are constantly thinking and encouraging students to think about about creating the environment they would like to live in, because they are the future, and we can't change that future and alter the environment that we are currently living in. But I think environmental approach to things is very significant.
Mark?
Well, John, I found your exercise really helpful thinking back to my own transformational moments. And
Moments.
I actually came up with 3, and they sort of inform 3 points I want to make very briefly. Well, one is the value of creating a safe space for learning to take place. I suspect that, at least for myself, when I didn't feel safe, it was hard for me to learn. And the memory of that is being a junior in high school, and after 4 years of French, going into a French class and discovering that the guy I had that year should have been an upper division university French teacher. He totally intimidated us. It was kind of like stories my wife told me years later about being in law school and getting called on all the time. And I really felt myself shut down and feel unsafe. And I think not much learning took place that year for me. But sort of in a negative way, I learned a lesson about the importance of students feeling safe. Another memory is being in graduate school and taking a course in Gestalt therapy. And as part of the course, we did some body psychology work in terms of not just studying and talking and intellectualizing, but experiencing how certain things are stored in the body, and that we can learn that there's a whole cognition that's possible through the physical body. And this whole integration of body and mind, I think, can be particularly supportive of transformational learning. And then the third memory is being a junior in university and taking a class in Mahayana Buddhism and discovering that we were actually going to have meditation sessions in the class, and that the study of self was a big part of what the course was about, not just studying the traditions and the texts and so forth, but that I, as a 20-year-old, was also the focal point of my learning through contemplative practice. So I've really tried real consciously this semester in the course I'm teaching on called Meditation and Mysteries of the Mind, which is a special topics course at NCC, to kind of weave these 3 principles into the class design. And even though it wasn't my intention to look for this, we did a mid-course critique yesterday. We're kind of halfway through the course. I had the students critique me and how the course was going, and I put the learning objectives down, and they had to rank how they were doing personally as a learner with those learning objectives so far. But one of the questions was, what's been your most memorable aspect for the course so far? So one student wrote, the idea that the course is to better myself and what I'm going through at this time in my life. This course does not add stress, it reduces it. And I don't think that's because I'm an easy grader, although maybe I am. I think there's something that we're trying to do in that class that's actually helping them deal with stress and actually study themselves and learn about themselves alongside all the academic material they're also doing. And then I have as a colleague and co-teacher for this Karen Studd, who's associate professor in the School of Dance, and every other session she does a module for about 30 minutes with them around movement and consciousness. And so if our academic studies are around, say, attention, which is certainly an issue in meditative practice, she has them up doing things about bodily movements that have to do with attention. Or we did another session that had to do with intention. And so in another module she was working with them in terms of gesture and movement that had to do with intention. And so we had a lovely comment from one of the other students, again, about what was most memorable in the course so far. I love the melding of the physical and the mental. The use of the body in conjunction with the mind is my favorite part of the course so far. So I'm not sure whether that lends itself too easily to every subject across the curriculum here, but to the extent that we can see the physical body as also a vehicle for transformational learning, I think it's an interesting challenge for us to consider.
I wasn't going to talk, but I do want to say one thing. Rose used the phrase full body, and I think use it kind of metaphorically, but I think your point is that it's literal, and it is literal. it's full body. And that, how much that is against the rub in this idea of conform, transform, since only Sue's here who can correct me, when New Century was first being formed, we talked about college competencies. One of the ones in another school that was going through the same process was a new Cal State school at Monterey Bay. And there was conversations back and forth, and we were both working off of Elmore College companies. One of the competencies they used that we decided not to was wellness. And that the wellness was going to work fine on the left coast. We got told by the state council that if we wanted to have physical education credit count, we need to make that explicit, that they weren't going to countenance the term wellness. And that's almost 20 years ago. Nevertheless, I think the same kind of response would happen.
At this point, we'll open the floor to anybody who would like to question anybody or contribute to the conversation in any way.
Could you go maybe to the second slide? Oh, that one. Yes, yes. When we have these two dimensions, we have here a classical example of a contradiction. And in theory of inventive problem solving, we say that when we have a contradiction, to solve such a problem with built-in contradiction, we have to go outside a given domain. We have to create new quality. And the difference between a routine problem and inventive problem is that in a routine problem, we find a compromise. In the case of inventive problem, we conduct a transformation, we create a new quality, and of course, we eliminate this contradiction. So maybe in this context, you could look at that this is a first step in your thinking or reasoning process, how to eliminate this contradiction. Then it will be done, I suppose, on the level of a single course, school, maybe university. And this is also part, as I feel, part of mission of our center. How to conduct this transformation, how to create this new quality. And of course, in engineering context, there's an entire method which provides rules or decision rules or heuristics how to eliminate all kinds of contradictions. But they could be maybe formulated also on psychological level or on abstract educational level, and maybe something interesting would emerge. Because a compromise will never be sufficient.
What about intermediate steps, though, which is what I had in mind? You know, you have the first line, and maybe the second one is where I was thinking of application, and then you move on to another one, so that there's some kind of procedure or steps that could be taken to reach the final goal.
Yes.
And that maybe there's plenty more than just one in the middle. But it wasn't, I didn't really have the idea that it was a compromise, but it was maybe constructing a continuum.
Yeah, it's a trade-off.
Well, I don't know that it has to be a trade-off. You can reframe each of those columns from the point of view of the other columns. They don't necessarily have to remain contradictory. But in order to eliminate the contradiction, you have to reframe how you define each side in a way that makes them mutually constitutive. Because being a member of a community is intensely personal to me, for example. And there's an intense amount of personal gratification and personal learning that comes from living and working in community. So how do you define what's personal and what's communal, and how do you define them in ways that is in the terms of the other? So you define the X in terms of the Y, and then the contradiction becomes a mutual constitutive meaning that you cannot really understand and fully experience one without the other. And it also equalizes, right? Because I want my students to know, like, the history of their field. I want my graduate students to know the history of their field, for example. I want them to have that curricular knowledge. I want my undergrads to know what the key research is in a particular area, but I also want them to experience that. So that, but if we start out conceiving of these as opposites, which we do in contemporary academic culture, then they are opposites. and I mean, I've argued at length in several pieces about define the X in terms of the Y, define the Y in terms of the X, and then you create a whole rather than a contradiction.
Well, I understood it in more abstract terms, and I wasn't concerned about last 3 or 4 rows. I was concerned about the top row.
Absolutely.
And in this case, it is, of course, so on left side, I understand conform, that means follow deduction, follow rational reasoning, and transform, create a new quality. Be creative, it means use abduction, something entirely different. From this point of view, of course, we have a contradiction.
But how do you interpret conformity?
Well,
From a transformer use. I mean, it's a different question.
it is a different
agree,
question.
I
We could
agree,
talk
but
about
it's a
it,
different
yes.
question.
It could be understood in a very narrow engineering context, in the context of design codes, design methods, body of knowledge, etc., or in more abstract terms, conforming to standards of a given society. I spent several years living in Africa, in Nigeria, for example, and conformity in Nigeria wasn't necessarily the same conformity as here, or in Europe, where I was born and raised.
Do you have a window on this, Heather? I saw your hand up.
Well, I guess I was just thinking a little bit more about what Rose and Mark offered, and back to John's question just about Mason's mission and where are we delivering on the mission. And I don't know, it may be unique to my experience, but I've had a number of students, some sociology students in particular, who come, undergraduates, who become really weary of theory and of because they start to feel so hopeless. And so kind of what you're talking about taking the principles and giving them and instilling the capacity to be creative and be integrative and be inventive. I just wonder if we are offering those kinds of opportunities for students all the time in all disciplines, because I do think it has to do with making sense of what they're studying in the context of their life and in the context of their life purpose. So that's just my comment.
I have an example, and if I were to share like an aha moment, it's actually just happened on Sunday. I train art teachers, and I teach an undergraduate course with some graduate students called Teaching Critical Response to Art. It's a course where students are able to synthesize their knowledge, their background of art history, criticism, aesthetics, and figure out how they would teach non-studio aspects of art. And for the 5th year in a row, we work with museums in DC. And they actually, this year we worked with the Portrait Gallery. And everyone picks one object that they own in their heart, no security, no insurance, for the whole semester. And they did family tours. They had to work in groups of 4. They had to figure out the order. They had to figure out a theme. They came out with themes to engage them, whether it was being art scouts, or one group got big magnifying glasses, art detectives. So there's a lot of creativity. And they do it twice. So they actually have an hour in between, so they're able to shift. And it's kind of like a blind date experience where they meet a family or several families and they don't know who they're going to meet. And they really, I was just really astounded at how I took more students than I usually have in that class, how all students got easy got the A. There was no question about that. But some of the things that they reflected on in class last night were things like, one woman said, I went through Mason as an undergraduate in art, and everything I learned, this was her hand language, it was all about me, and what I knew about art history, what I knew. And she said, I collaborate, she could see how this is going to be a very important role for her as a teacher, working as a department, working with, being able to assess, being able to reflect. And so I guess what I want to comment on is the teacher as designer. Mark, designing this class and bringing in movement, and so that the significance, the relevance, it's absolutely direct. I think these direct primary experiences are what people are losing today, because they can look online and think they saw the show, or they hear the news 10 times and they think, oh my God. So it's the primacy of the qualitative experience, and all the things you do and shift. You could have had dance at the end, or you could, so.
Well, I'm going to bring you in.
And I'm coming. I can't wait. But so I just think it's not as hard as we think. It's really about, where it's that whole backwards design, but where do we want these students to go, and how can this experience today be very relevant, very significant? The Gates, Bill and Melinda Gates now are talking about high school reform with the new 3 R's: rigor, relevance, and relationships. So, and if you just look at the worst high school in the world and you taught in that way, we're producing the future. So anyway, it's just, I've done this many, many years. I used to do it when I taught at Maryland Institute, and we've worked with 5 different museums. We'll probably move to another. But there's something about the immediacy, and we have to make more of those moments happen in our classrooms, in our families, in everything. But I think what we're doing is modeling it so there's an expectation and there's real experience. So that's kind of my take on some of this, and it's just very exciting to be in a room of kindred spirits. But I mean, I know that every time we create in this way, it's what really gets us excited. I mean, we are transformed.
We have time for 1 or 2 more comments. You feel free to hang out afterwards if you want to be social and finish the food. The formal portion will close up at 1 for those of us that have strict calendars.
I was going to bring forward the notion of transformation from the field that I work in, which is teacher preparation. And I just returned from a conference of the American Association of Colleges of Teacher Education. And I'm sitting here listening to our conversation, and we seem to be focused on a lot of the college experience. But remember, each person that comes in our classes has spent 12 or 13 years in previous education. And I just beg to ask the question, what is it we do in PK-12 that makes the job here more difficult? Or maybe the question is, what is it we are not doing? And I'm encouraged by this national organization who is pushing an agenda along with other major public institutions and agencies to transform the way we prepare teachers for the P-12 world. Because the old argument continues that those people in the P-12 schools aren't teaching people anything.
But part of that is not their
No,
issue.
I understand.
Well, I mean, the force on curricular knowledge and technical rationality and K-12 SOLs and everything else is just shove that in a whole other direction.
And I would argue that if we transform how teachers are prepared, they would deal with curricular knowledge coming at it from a completely different way. Yes, there are standardized tests and SOL, standards of learning in the state of Virginia and whatever. But if anyone lifts themselves up to think about the end, as Renee talked about, you can forget about those things and trust that with your preparation, you're going to make things happen that would help shift people in that direction. So I had to get my...
It's a very risky spot for a new teacher to be in.
It's a very risky spot, but I want to get more people conscious of what's happening to our students that we work with now in the undergraduate and graduate programs, because they've been conditioned, if you will.
And their world is so different than ours.
That what?
They've been colonized.
Colonized, right.
Yeah, it's a categorical and linear thinking.
Absolutely, and the resistance to think in a transformative way, it's very uncomfortable.
But I think many teachers in the K-12 system, I worked there for 10 years, want to do the transformative kind. But it's very, very difficult when you're on the ground and in a school that's underperforming according to other people's ideas. It's you're almost doing 2 different things at the same time, and not everybody can handle 2 different things at the same time. But it is I think you're right, that the cure is got to go further down, but how it's going to get there is a real tough part.
Those of you that would like to continue to have a conversation
I want
in
to
this
capture
room.
one thing the two commentators said, or I think said in different ways, but I think the idea of designer, architect, engineer of learning experience is what is my mantra. But within that, I think the hard part is, you're quoting Bell Hooks, the open radicalness, safe space. I mean, I want to transform my students. That is, I want to form, shape them in ways that I think is the right way. But to be that safe space of open radicalness so that I am presenting, teaching, challenging, experiencing values, but that students have the place, the space to resist that and to create their own values, to have that tension of diverse thought and value, I think is not easy. It's easy for us to, and I'm not dismissing the guys who said it's easy for us to say, but boy, it's tough to do. So thank you.